The sun hadn't yet set when Dr. Harper Lin turned the key to the front door of her quiet home in Seattle, arms full with a chilled bottle of champagne and a small velvet box tucked in her coat pocket. The day had been long but exciting. She'd cut her presentation short at the Northwest Marine Ecology Conference just to make it back in time for their anniversary. 17 years of marriage, 17 years of building a life with Cole, her husband, and the father of their 2 children. She was tired, yes, but a good kind of tired, the kind that came from anticipation. She had plans, a warm dinner, a quiet toast, and the reveal of the delicate silver bracelet she'd been saving for months. The same one Cole had once admired in a shop window during a rare weekend getaway. But the moment Harper stepped into the foyer, something felt wrong. The house was too still, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. No music, no footsteps, not even the sound of the dishwasher humming. She tiptoed through the hallway, her heels clicking softly on the polished wood floors, expecting to find Cole perhaps asleep on the couch or preparing something in the kitchen. Instead, she heard a laugh from upstairs, unfamiliar, low, and male. Her stomach tightened. Then came a second sound, soft and unmistakable. Her husband's voice, warm and flirtatious in a way she hadn't heard in years. Something inside her went cold. Harper moved automatically, as if floating, ascending the staircase she had once climbed countless times to soothe crying babies or carry warm laundry. At the top, the door to their bedroom was slightly ajar. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She pushed it open with the same calm curiosity she might use to lift the lid on a specimen tank, and saw her husband entangled with a woman at least a decade younger, sheets thrown back, both startled only momentarily by the interruption. Cole didn't jump up. He didn't cover himself or even reach for the blanket. He just looked mildly annoyed, as if Harper had walked in during a meeting. "Harper," he said, exhaling, "what are you doing home so early?" Her hands trembled, the bottle of champagne slipping from her grasp and landing with a soft thud on the carpet. She stared at the scene in front of her, struggling to process it. The woman in bed with him stared back, wide-eyed, but unapologetic. Harper turned to her husband, waiting for an explanation, an apology, anything that might resemble the man she had trusted with her life. Instead, Cole sighed, brushing hair from the woman's face as he said, "Maybe you should give us some space. Come back in an hour. We can talk then." That was the moment something in Harper snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean internal break. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just whispered, 17 years, to no one in particular. Then she turned and walked out the door. The sound of Cole's voice calling her name followed her down the stairs, but she didn't stop. She walked straight to her car, started the engine with shaking hands, and drove without a plan. The city passed her by in a blur of headlights and neon signs. Her life, her marriage, her identity had crumbled in the span of seconds. And yet, somewhere deep beneath the grief, another feeling stirred, one she hadn't felt in years: clarity. As the first streetlights blinked on around her, Harper knew she wouldn't be going back. Not tonight. Not ever. Harper drove aimlessly through the rainy Seattle night, windshield wipers clicking in rhythm with her thudding heart. She didn't have a destination, just a desperate need to keep moving. The image of Cole's indifferent face burned into her mind, repeating like a cruel loop she couldn't escape. She eventually pulled into the parking lot of a roadside motel 2 hours outside the city, paying in cash and using a false name. She knew Cole tracked their bank accounts. He always had. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarettes, and the mattress sagged in the middle. But Harper collapsed onto it like it was the last safe place in the world. She didn't sleep. Instead, she stared at the water-stained ceiling, watching her entire life play in reverse. The school drop-offs, the shared glances across the dinner table, Max's first science fair ribbon, June's ballet recitals, the mortgage payments, the vacations they could barely afford but always found joy in, and the countless late nights, Cole claimed, were strategy meetings, when in truth, he'd already begun replacing her. Grief came in strange waves. Sometimes it was cold, numbing silence that made her forget how to cry. Other times it was so sharp she had to bite down on a pillow just to keep from screaming. But mostly it was disbelief. How had she missed it? How had she, a woman who studied the patterns of marine ecosystems, failed to notice the collapse of her own home? The signs had been there, she realized. The emotional distance, the way Cole talked over her at dinner parties, the subtle withdrawal of affection, and worst of all, the shifting attitudes of their children. How Max had become curt, how June had started parroting Cole's dismissive tones. She saw now that the erosion had been happening slowly, quietly, like coral bleaching unnoticed until the reef is dead. 3 days passed. She turned off her phone, changed her email passwords, deleted every photo of her family from the cloud. She didn't tell anyone, not her sister, not her colleagues, not even her best friend. There was no place left for her in Seattle, not anymore. With no plan, no belongings except a suitcase and her work laptop, Harper checked out of the motel and began driving south. She didn't know where she was going, she just knew she couldn't go back. The southernmost tip of the United States wasn't part of Harper Lin's plan. Then again, she didn't have one. She arrived in Key West, Florida, sunburnt and emotionally threadbare, after 2 weeks of meandering through coastal towns along the Gulf. The island's easy pace and untamed ocean felt like balm to her battered soul. A tiny posting on a local marine research center's job board caught her attention. A short-term field researcher was needed for a coral reef monitoring project. It was below her pay grade, far from the prestige of her former lab in Seattle, but Harper applied under her maiden name and was hired without fanfare. That was how Dr. Lin became just Harper, the quiet woman who worked odd hours and never spoke much about her past. She rented a weathered but charming bungalow just 5 blocks from the shore. Her neighbors were mostly retirees and local artists, who barely blinked at her aloofness. Her days were spent in the field, diving into warm turquoise waters to examine reef decay, taking samples, logging data. The routine, the ocean, the anonymity. It gave her room to breathe. In time, she started to feel human again. She kept her head down, took on extra shifts, and rebuilt herself in the silence. The only constant interruption to her solitude came in the form of Wes Calderon, the rugged and sharp-tongued coordinator of a nearby wildlife rescue center. He was a man of salt and sun, constantly pulling up in muddy boots with rescued pelicans in his arms, or baby turtles. Their first interaction was a clash. He accused her team of blocking nesting access with their equipment. She shot back that he was disturbing coral beds with his boat. But over time, their paths continued to cross. At conservation meetings, cleanup dives, beach restoration projects, Wes was observant, funny, and infuriatingly persistent. He called her science boss, and she called him wildlife cowboy. He never asked about her past, but his presence chipped slowly at the wall around her. He brought her Cuban coffee when she forgot lunch, left notes with funny drawings on her clipboard, and challenged her in a way that felt safe. Months passed. Harper found herself laughing again, once, even snorting in public, which startled her so much she stopped mid-laugh. Her colleagues began inviting her out after work. She started wearing color again, bright sundresses instead of gray polos. Wes once teased her about it, and she didn't bite his head off. One quiet afternoon, while tagging manatees together, she caught herself watching him instead of the data screen. That night, sitting alone on her porch with a glass of wine, she realized the ocean had done more than cleanse her wounds. It had created space for something new. Harper still didn't talk about Cole or her children, but something was shifting, subtly, like the tide. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was starting to live. Their connection wasn't instant. It was slow, uneven, like sea glass shaped over time. Harper had built tall, silent walls around herself, but Wes Calderon had an uncanny way of leaning casually against them without ever pushing too hard. He'd show up at the Marine Center with cracked jokes and steaming empanadas from his aunt's cafe, or wordlessly fix the flat tire on her bike before she noticed it was broken. Harper wasn't used to someone doing things without expectation. She certainly wasn't used to someone who listened without trying to fix her. But Wes had a way of existing near her without demanding anything from her. And that, ironically, made her want to give him more. Their friendship took root quietly, deepening through shared silences on long boat rides and late-night talks over conservation reports. Harper learned Wes had once been a firefighter, but left after an accident that killed 2 of his team members. He'd returned to Key West to care for his niece temporarily and ended up staying. The vulnerability in his voice when he talked about loss surprised her. It mirrored her own grief, though neither of them gave it a name. One evening, after a particularly long day rescuing a beached dolphin, Harper offered to buy him dinner as a thank you. He raised an eyebrow, teasing, "Is this your version of a first date?" She froze. He backtracked instantly, apologizing, saying he was kidding, but she surprised them both by replying, "Maybe it is." Their first real date wasn't glamorous. A quiet seafood shack by the marina, cheap white wine, shared fries. Harper found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in what felt like years. When he walked her to her door, she hesitated, then kissed him first. It was tentative, a question rather than a declaration. But Wes answered without words, his hand gently cradling her face like she might break if he moved too fast. That night, as they lay tangled in sheets, moonlight pouring through her bedroom window, Harper felt something crack open in her chest, something that had long been frozen over. It wasn't fireworks or cinematic passion. It was better. It was warm, real. They didn't define it at first. No labels, no pressure. Just beach walks, working side by side, and shared Sunday mornings filled with coffee and Wes's terrible attempts at pancakes. Harper still kept her past close to the vest, but she noticed herself reaching for Wes's hand more often. She found herself humming again in the mornings. When a storm knocked out power on the island, they lit candles and danced barefoot in the kitchen, soaked in rain and joy. And when he whispered, "I'm not going anywhere," she believed him. For the first time in years, Harper didn't feel like she was running from something. She was beginning to feel like she might be running toward something, toward someone who saw her scars and stayed anyway. Harper never imagined she'd become a mother again, not after losing Max in June the way she did. The idea of raising another child felt like inviting more heartbreak, another chance for life to rip something precious away. But when she sat in her bathroom, staring down at the faint pink lines on a test stick, a quiet stillness settled over her. It wasn't fear or panic, it was something softer, something like wonder. Wes found her sitting on the edge of the tub, the test trembling in her hand. "I didn't plan this," she whispered. He knelt beside her, took her hand in his, and replied simply, "Maybe that's what makes it perfect." The pregnancy brought out a gentler side of Harper, one she hadn't felt in years. She swapped wetsuit dives for shoreline work, traded long hours for prenatal yoga and doctor's visits. Wes became her anchor, always one step ahead, packing her snacks, rubbing her back, building a crib before she even asked. When she gave birth to their daughter on a stormy August morning, the hospital lights flickering under hurricane winds, they named her Isla, after the tiny coral islands Harper had once devoted her career to protecting. Isla was everything Harper never knew she needed. Curious, wild, and radiant. From the moment she opened her eyes, it felt like the universe had given Harper a second chance to be whole. She sang lullabies she thought she'd forgotten. She took hundreds of photos. She memorized the way Isla's lashes curled when she slept, the way her fist curled around Harper's finger like she'd never let go. And Wes, he stepped into fatherhood with quiet pride, balancing bottle feedings with baby carrier hikes, swaying Isla to sleep while humming off-key. Together, they made a new kind of family, one built not on bloodlines or obligation, but on healing, trust, and love, freely chosen. Harper's past was still a shadow, sometimes creeping in on quiet nights, but every time Isla giggled, every time Wes kissed her forehead or reached for her hand, she remembered something important. The past may have broken her, but it didn't define her. This life, the one they were building, wasn't a replacement for what was lost. It was a beginning, born from the ashes. And this time, she was ready to fight for it. It was an ordinary Tuesday when Harper's past found her. She was sitting at her desk in the research center, reviewing coral bleaching data, Isla's crayon drawing of a fish taped proudly to her monitor when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made her pause. An unshakable tug in her gut. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" There was silence and then a voice, tentative, cracked, achingly familiar. "Mom?" Harper's heart stopped. It was June, her daughter. Now 20 and sounding both older and heartbreakingly young all at once. "Mom, I know everything now." Harper didn't speak. She couldn't. Her mouth went dry. She gripped the edge of her desk, as June continued in a rush, her voice trembling. "I found the letters. The ones you wrote. Dad hid them from us." Harper closed her eyes, memories colliding with the present. The letters, dozens of them, handwritten during the first year after she left, tucked into birthday cards and college brochures, never answered. "Max found them when he came home on leave. He's the one who convinced me to call you." Harper's mind reeled. Max had joined the military? The boy who once cried at animated movie endings? June continued, now crying softly. "We were so angry, Mom. Dad told us you abandoned us, that you didn't want us anymore. But we didn't know. We didn't know the truth." Harper felt her own tears start to fall. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but never like this, so fragile, so raw. Can we see you?" June asked. "I just want to talk, to understand. Please?" Harper's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Yes, of course." Her hands trembled as she scribbled down a number, a flight time. When she hung up, she sat in silence, her pulse hammering. The past she'd buried was rising, fast, threatening to drown her. But this time she wasn't alone. That evening, when she told Wes, he didn't ask questions or press for details. He simply wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "Whatever you need, we're in this together." As the wind rustled the palm trees outside, Harper held her daughter's number in her hand like it was a lifeline. The ghosts had returned, but maybe, just maybe, they came bearing the chance to make things right. The airport terminal in Key West had never felt so suffocating. Harper stood near the arrival gate, her fingers clenched around the handle of her canvas tote bag, heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to break free. Wes stood beside her, calm but alert. Isla perched on his hip, too young to understand the storm brewing beneath her mother's calm exterior. The flight from Chicago had landed 10 minutes ago, and any moment now, Harper would come face to face with the children she hadn't seen in 7 years. She didn't know what scared her more, that they might not forgive her, or that she might not recognize them at all. Then she saw them. June appeared first, her long dark hair pulled into a low bun, eyes scanning the crowd with nervous urgency. Max followed, taller than Harper remembered, wearing a military-issued backpack and a look of cautious determination. When June spotted Harper, she froze. Harper stepped forward slowly, unsure of what to say. But she didn't have to say anything. June broke into a run and threw her arms around her mother's neck, sobbing into her shoulder. Harper held her like she never wanted to let go again. tears streaming down her face. Max approached more slowly. His embrace was more reserved, a quick, firm hug, but the way he rested his hand on her back spoke volumes. He had come. That alone shattered Harper's doubts. Back at their home, the tension gradually softened. Wes cooked dinner, his famous coconut rice and grilled fish, and Isla bounced between rooms, occasionally peeking at the newcomers she was told were her brother and sister. June knelt beside Isla first, offering her a stuffed seahorse. "I'm your big sister," she whispered. Isla blinked, then smiled, declaring, "I like you." Max gave a quiet chuckle from the doorway. "She's got your attitude," he said to Harper, his voice low but warm. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. That night, they sat on the back porch as the sky burned with orange and purple streaks. June curled up beside Harper, sharing stories of college and regret. Max sat with Wes, the two of them trading stories about search and rescue missions and military fieldwork. For the first time in years, Harper felt like her heart wasn't being pulled in opposite directions. Her past and present were in the same space, not clashing, but beginning to understand each other. Before bed, Max handed Harper a small photo, one of her old letters, creased and yellowed but kept all this time. "I read every word," he said quietly. "I just wish I'd read them sooner." Harper smiled through tears. "You read them when you were ready. That's all that matters." For the first time in a long time, Harper didn't dread the morning. She looked at her children, her whole family, and thought, maybe healing doesn't come in a flood. Maybe it arrives in moments like this. Quiet, honest, true. The confrontation came not with a phone call, but with a shadow at the edge of a brightly lit room. It happened during a community marine fundraiser hosted at the Key West Conservatory, an event Harper had helped organize. The evening had been filled with laughter, local music, and speeches about coral preservation. Harper had just finished speaking, her children proudly watching from the front row, Wes's hand resting gently on her back. And then, like a bad tide returning without warning, Cole appeared at the edge of the crowd. Aging, stiff, and clearly uninvited. He waited until the mingling began before approaching her table, his voice low and strained. "So this is your new life?" he sneered. "Pretending you're a hero while abandoning your kids?" Max stepped in front of Harper without hesitation, his military stance firm. "Back off, Dad." Cole scoffed, looking at June. "You too? You're both so easy to manipulate. Don't forget who raised you." But this time, there was no power in his words, just bitterness. June's voice trembled, but didn't waver. "No, you lied to us. You kept her away." Harper stood up, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Leave, Cole. You don't belong here." He made a move toward her, but Wes stepped forward, flanked by two nearby event volunteers who had quickly alerted security. "Don't cause a scene," Cole muttered. "Too late," Harper replied coldly. "The only scene is the one you made when you destroyed our family." Security escorted him out moments later, his protests fading into the humid night. Harper stood still, heart racing, watching the doors close behind him. June squeezed her hand. Max exhaled slowly, and Harper knew the past had come for one last desperate grab, but this time it didn't win. Life after Cole's final exit began to settle into something Harper never thought she'd experience again. Peace. A few months after the confrontation, she and Wes found a charming two-story home nestled just beyond the mangroves, on the quieter side of Key West. It had a wraparound porch, an airy kitchen, and enough rooms for Isla to grow and for Max and June to visit whenever they wanted. The first time Max walked through the house, he smiled and said, "Feels like home," before dropping his duffel bag in the spare bedroom. June brought her books, her podcast equipment, and a quiet energy that filled the space with warmth. There were family dinners around the big reclaimed wood table, laughter echoing across the backyard as Isla splashed in the kiddie pool, and late-night porch talks under a sky filled with stars. Max took an interest in marine rescue, shadowing Wes on boat calls and eventually enrolling in an environmental science program at a nearby college. June began working on a podcast miniseries called Letters from the Reef, inspired by Harper's old unsent letters, telling stories of grief, healing, and second chances. Harper listened to the early drafts, heart swelling with pride. Her daughter was finally telling their story, and her own. Sundays became sacred. Wes barbecued, Isla collected seashells, and the family gathered like they'd always been meant to. Harper often found herself watching them quietly, eyes damp, realizing how far they'd all come. It wasn't a perfect picture, healing never is, but it was real, the kind of real she'd once believed was lost forever. One afternoon, as Isla played tag with Max and June in the yard, Harper sat beside Wes on the porch swing. He reached over and squeezed her hand. "We did it," he said simply. Harper leaned her head on his shoulder, watching her children, all her children, laugh in the golden light of late afternoon. "We're still doing it," she replied softly. And for the first time in over a decade, Harper felt whole. Some nights, after Isla had gone to bed and the house had fallen into that sweet, familiar hush, Harper would sit alone on the back porch with a cup of tea and let her mind drift. The ocean breeze still carried the salt and stories of the past, but it no longer haunted her. Instead, it reminded her of how far she had come, from the woman who drove away in silence after her world crumbled, to the woman who now sat surrounded by laughter, love, and second chances. The pain hadn't disappeared. The scars of betrayal, abandonment, and years lost with her children still lived quietly inside her, but they no longer controlled the narrative. They were just part of the story, not the ending. She often thought about that version of herself in the motel room outside Seattle, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she would ever feel joy again. What would she say to that woman now? Maybe something simple. Keep going. The love you give will find its way back. And it had. In Wes's patient, grounding presence, in Isla's bright, unstoppable spirit, in the quiet resilience of Max, in the fierce heart of June. Harper never imagined a life like this. Not perfect, but deeply, beautifully real. She'd learned that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about transforming pain into purpose, isolation into connection. It's about showing up, again and again, even after the world has tried to convince you you're no longer needed. She had shown up for herself, for her children, for the life she'd dared to build from the ashes. As Wes joined her on the porch, wrapping a blanket around their shoulders, Harper looked out at the stars glittering above the waves. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Harper smiled, resting her head against his chest. "None," she whispered. "Every broken piece led me here." And in that moment, wrapped in warmth, love, and moonlight, she finally believed it. She hadn't just survived. She had come home. The story of Harper Lin teaches us that healing after betrayal is not only possible, it can lead to something even more meaningful than what was lost. Through her journey from heartbreak and abandonment to rediscovery and reconnection, we learn that walking away from what destroys you isn't weakness, it's strength. Harper's story reminds us that love should never come at the cost of self-worth, and that sometimes the most courageous act is choosing yourself when no one else will. It also shows the power of patience and openness in rebuilding relationships. Even when the wounds seem too deep, time, truth, and unconditional love can bring people back together. Harper didn't chase revenge or validation. She focused on rebuilding a life rooted in peace, purpose, and honesty. In doing so, she created a new, chosen family that accepted her fully. Ultimately, the story reveals that life doesn't always follow the path we imagined, but the detours can lead us to something even better. The past may shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. And most importantly, you are never too broken, too late, or too far gone to begin again, and to find joy waiting on the other side.